Hi everyone, Friday, happy weekend. This is another episode of Unmasking God's Grace. We started with the perfectionism. We looked at how we need to get rid of perfectionism but still strive for high standards. Because if we strive for perfectionism, where would that leave Christ, who came to die for our, imperfections? I figured it was not fair it didn't make sense to go to the next topic without really looking at where does perfectionism come from, because it really comes from somewhere. And for my case, I really had to dig deep, because when I was writing the book, the chapter, I realized that the experiences I went through together with my classmates in high school really were humiliating, and both physically and emotionally. At that moment, we didn't realize. Only after we came out and through the discussions that have come out of the alumni page, we realized that these were really mental and physical abuse in that sense. So then, for my case, it was the shame, the humiliation. So then you want to strive to be better every time, but not because to do you good, but to prove to people that you can do it. So then that's why I suffer from, not suffer, I have this tendency of being afraid of letting people down, fear of failure, fear of saying no. So my love language is acts of service and giving gifts. So when anyone needs me, whether it's my family, I always put myself last, and that's why my husband is trying to teach me to say yes to myself. But that aside, so we've looked at perfectionism, where it comes from, and then now something happened 2 weeks ago that I'm not proud of, because in high school we were caned. It was not even spanking. This was more than spanking. It was kind of like more corporal punishment. We used to say we were like in the army barracks, wake up at 5, it's run. If you're not doing anything that is according to what is required, you're beaten up, or you do some punishments like kneeling on, scorching on the gravel, and scorching sun on your bare knees, things like that. When you get less average results, you're called off at the assembly, your name is shouted, and while you're moving to the assembly at the front, the teacher says mockery words, don't be like this student, or if you want to amount to something, then be like this student, forgetting that every student learns in a different pace. I am a slow learner. I need to read a sentence 5 times to be able to know which equation, which solution am I going to apply to a certain mathematical problem. So like I mentioned in the last video, where I was asked to do this sum on the board, and before I'd even known what I was gonna do, this teacher punched me on my back and started saying mockery words. Then I just shut down, didn't want to raise hands, just found my own way of coping. But I realized that once I left high school, I really did not want to settle for average results, not for myself, but now I'm realizing that it's coming from that fear of failing, because you don't want to be ridiculed. So you want to just do it well. But then I was raised up in a very tight, culture of yes, of no's and don'ts. Don't do this, don't do that. Just study, work hard, be a good girl. And in high school, the punishments, instilling punishment, and this corporal, actions, like kneeling on pavements, carrying bags of sand for constructing the dormitories. We had to do that as punishment. For them, it justified that if you instill violence, it equates to good behavior, or good grades. Like when you beat up a child, it makes them become good. And then So that's what I knew. I mean, and you didn't even know what you were being punished for. You just, all of a sudden you're being punished, and then you have to guess for yourself, oh, maybe it's because of that and that action that I did or misbehavior that I did. But there was never a dialogue like, okay, this and this happened, let's sit down, these are the consequences. If you don't do this, you will get this, these are the things that will happen to you. There was never dialogue. I don't remember until my 20s, not even, I think until now, someone ever sat me down and said, someone older than me sat me down and said, okay, Nelly, I'm sorry, these are the actions I took, but I feel like we needed to talk. Apart from my husband, who made me start talking about these things, because I don't really talk about them. So my husband always wants us until now to talk about everything that we do, like we put it on the table. And for me, the punishments in high school, they were never related to behavior, to the misbehavior that happened. It felt like it related to me, as me being a failure, or me being, not smart, things like that. And then I realize now that the punishment needs to be actually geared towards the misbehavior rather than to the child or to the person, so that you can learn from it. Because what happens next time, someone is just afraid of not repeating it, not because of learning the good behavior, but because of fear of what will happen. So you come into a room and there's all of a sudden people are, running around because they're afraid because you're coming. So something happened 2 weeks ago. I was so frustrated because I grew up surrounded by punishment. So either being spanked by my mom, who obviously told us what we had done wrong, but in high school, nobody ever had dialogue with you. So I was frustrated when my eldest was not doing the things I had asked, and you keep on nagging and repeating many times, which I know is not a good way. Thankfully, she's a good girl. But there's those moments, I think parents, we can relate, that you find yourself in a circle of, repetition and thinking that you're the only one who, gets to nag, and nobody kind of sees that it's important. Which now I realize that our priorities as adults are not the same priorities as our children. Whatever I find important might not be the same thing they find important. So I spanked her in a light way, not the Kenyan way. And like I say this, like it happened and I'm not proud of, because there's a documentary on the Dutch TV, and they were showing how corporal punishment is happening in various countries across the world. And my husband was so shocked, but I told him, oh, this is nothing compared to what we went through in high school. They're not showing you what the truth of the matter. This is on a light scale. And I was actually proud of it. Like, yeah, we survived it. But he looked at me like, are you even talking about this the way you're talking about this? Like taking it so lightly? Like no adult should be able to do this. And I looked at him, I did not get it. And he said one thing, that I hope this doesn't happen in our house. We didn't have kids then, so I just brushed it like, yeah, okay. But you see, this is the only form of punishment I have seen. So when this happened with my daughter, I have controlled myself in the past, but this time I just found myself, and I spanked her, gave her like 3 spanks on her bare leg. And the way she looked at me was like, she was so shocked that I actually did that. She looked at me in like, did you actually do that to me? And she was screaming and crying. And one thing she said after all the conversations, and while crying, she said, what kind of a mother does that just hits her child as if you're in a karate club, or or the child is a punching bag? And that really got to me. Of course, we had discussions, and the dad asked asked me to apologize to her and try to explain to her my view and, you know, my actions, why I did that. And while I was doing it, I was actually thinking, I am an adult and I'm apologizing to a 7-year-old. I could not grasp it, really, because in my 33 years of life, I have not seen any adult apologize to a child. Not even apologize, have dialogue, like, okay, this you've done wrong, this you, no, I have not seen it. And now I see, like with my friends who are in my generation, I see that what I see with my friends is that a lot is changing, that there's more dialogue with children, explaining to them what they've done wrong, that it's about the misbehavior and not them being wrong, like them as a person to be wrong, like I am wrong, because we've seen that we are enough in our previous video. So as I tried to gather myself up and started explaining to her, telling her, for me, the only form of punishment I knew was, you know, being spanked. But that doesn't give me an excuse to do it to her, because I can just have dialogue. But I was frustrated because she was not listening. And then I was thinking to myself, does the spanking really benefit the child, or it is more for me? Is it more for me because it releases my tension? Then I got to reading and about it, and I read that some various pediatricians had advised to tell parents not to spank their children because, first of all, it humiliates them. There's some self-esteem that is lost. If a child wanted to blossom, they shut themselves down. They're not going to be free with you. And this is an important relationship, like the parents and the children, or any other relationship, because there's trust. And once the trust is lost, they feel like they're not safe. They cannot feel safe to share things with you. And I've seen this because IG is more free with her dad. I don't know, maybe girls and their dads, but they can talk about anything, you know. But for me, it's kind of like she always has to filter what she says with me, because she knows that I will also be filtering to see if she's saying something wrong. But that I'm learning. That is something that I am learning. So I started reading and found out that our personalities, or the things we went through, it influences or triggers certain behaviors in our children. You know, like if you're shouting, your child will automatically shout. But then when they shout back, you will be like, why are you shouting? But you are the one who is shouting. Yeah. So we don't want our kids to shut down on us. We want them to be open and talk about life struggles or the things, or even fun things. Because then if we spank them, we're telling them anybody bigger than you can instill violence to you. And what spanking also does, it might mean that things are solved with violence in this world. And we've seen that violence does not solve anything. So I was reading about this also more from this publisher, Amy McCready, and she was giving 5 R's of consequences, that the consequences have to be related to behavior, to the misbehavior. It has to be respectful, reasonable, with every stage of a child, revealed and repeated back. So the child has to repeat back and say, this, mommy does not like this because this will happen if I don't do it, and I also agree with this. So yeah, I just wanted to leave us with this. But if you're also struggling with this, coming from a culture where things were done differently and that is the only thing you know, and now you have to kind of learn different ways, which are the good ways. And I don't mean we have to spare the rod, because we don't want to spoil our children. We want them to grow up to be, to walk, to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And that means also, living a life that is worthy of the sacrifice that we've been given. So if you're like me, first of all, for you to experience God's grace, I want you to forgive yourself. Forgive yourself, knowing that you can start over. You're not too old to learn. You're not too old to fit in, and discover better ways of disciplining your children that are more respectful to them as an individual, seeing them as a human and as a human first. So yeah, this is where the topic brought us to. Pray that you be the role models you want to be in your surrounding, or to your children, or to your family. And I'll see you next time on this series. Take care, and I hope you have a good weekend. Bye bye.